Welcome to Sacred Texts Summarized, where we delve into the heart of spiritual writings and uncover the guidance they hold for our modern lives. Today, we immerse ourselves in the Dhammapada, a text cherished by Buddhists as one of the most direct expressions of the Buddha's teaching. Although its 423 verses are arranged into 26 chapters, our aim here is to seamlessly weave a narrative that captures its essential themes without rigidly dividing its wisdom into sections. To begin understanding the Dhammapada, imagine travelling back over 2 millennia to the fertile plains of northern India. In that era, spiritual seekers and thinkers roamed from city to city, delivering discourses in roadside groves and beneath ancient trees. The Buddha was among these revered teachers, yet his approach was distinct, emphasizing the transformative power of a calm, self-aware mind. Monks who followed him memorized his words meticulously, preserving them through oral recitation until they were finally written down in what is now known as the Pali Canon. Within that vast canon rests the Dhammapada, whose very title can be rendered as the path of the Dharma, or the path of truth. From its opening lines, the Dhammapada establishes a core idea. Mind precedes all mental states. Mind is their chief. They are all mind-wrought. If, with an impure mind, a person speaks or acts, suffering follows them like the wheel that follows the ox's foot. But if, with a pure mind, a person speaks or acts, happiness follows them like a shadow that never departs. These verses strike at the very root of the Buddha's insight, pointing out that our internal world, the thoughts we nurture and the intentions we harbour, shapes how we experience life. Across the text, we are continually reminded that the mind can be our greatest ally or our most treacherous foe, depending on whether it is disciplined or left to wander in destructive patterns. What do we mean by discipline of mind? The Dhammapada paints a portrait of awareness, vigilance, and moral reflection, all woven into daily life. Rather than a notion of severe austerity, the discipline celebrated here is a form of watchfulness. It's the ability to notice impulses, anger, greed, arrogance, and then consciously redirect them towards something more constructive. Again and again, the verses proclaim that the seeds we sow in thought will inevitably flower in action. When we let negative states fester, we end up creating suffering for ourselves and those around us. Conversely, when we choose clarity, kindness, and generosity, we pave the way for enduring contentment. This emphasis on mental intention finds vivid illustration in a story often tied to the Dhammapada's commentaries, the legend of Angulimala. Angulimala was said to be a fearsome marauder, so named because he wore a gruesome garland of human fingers. Such was his infamy that entire villages lived in terror. The Buddha, however, remained unafraid. Meeting this violent bandit on a remote path, the Buddha stood calm and steady, radiating compassion. Angulimala tried to catch him, but somehow could never quite close the distance. In his exhaustion and confusion, he finally paused long enough to truly see the Buddha's presence, a presence unshaken by threat or anger. Something in Angulimala's mind broke open. He recognized the cruelty and futility of his deeds, and in that moment embraced a path of non-violence. In the tradition, this transformation stands as proof that even the darkest mind can be illuminated by compassionate insight. Though Angulimala's story is told outside the Dhammapada's verses themselves, it perfectly captures the text's core message. No one is beyond redemption once the mind turns toward wisdom. And what is wisdom according to the Dhammapada? Central to it is the recognition that all phenomena in this world, objects, relationships, sensations, even our breath, are transient. All conditioned things are impermanent. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. This is the path to purification. These lines remind us how impermanence lies at the heart of Buddhist thought. The text does not suggest that the world is bleak or meaningless because everything changes. Rather, It urges us to notice how grasping onto the fleeting inevitably leads to disappointment. By recognizing that nothing remains static, we learn to let experiences arise and pass without clinging or aversion. While this feels counterintuitive, people generally want to hold on to youth, love, and security. The Dhammapada insists that deeper peace arises from accepting life's continual ebb and flow. This idea of non-clinging appears in countless variations. The text likens unmet desires to thirsty travelers running after mirages, never finding lasting relief. It also cautions against illusions of permanence in our own bodies and status. In verse after verse, we are reminded that each passing day ushers us closer to old age or death, a natural law that spares no one. But the Dhammapada underscores that this is not a counsel to despair. It is, in fact, a key to living more fully, appreciating each moment's fragility and preciousness, and freeing ourselves from habits of rigid attachment. Anger, in particular, is singled out as an obstacle that devours the one who harbours it. The text is replete with verses that counsel forbearance and goodwill in place of wrath. One famous line reads, "Conquer anger by love, conquer evil by good, conquer the stingy by generosity, conquer the liar by truth." Anger is depicted as a blaze that scorches both the target and the one who clings to it, whereas love and compassion function like cool water, dousing the flames. Another well-known anecdote from the Dhammapada's commentarial tradition illustrates this through the story of a man who insults the Buddha, only for the Buddha to calmly say that if an offered gift is not accepted, it remains the property of the giver. The man's anger, left unreceived, becomes his own burden. Though it is a short lesson, it resonates powerfully with the text's view that one's internal stance, whether hateful or peaceful, ultimately shapes one's freedom from suffering. In addition to pointing out pitfalls, the Dhammapada also celebrates the possibility of happiness. But happiness here is not about piling up worldly comforts or fleeting pleasures. Health is the greatest gift. Contentment is the greatest wealth. Trust is the best relationship. Nirvana is the highest happiness. These simple but potent lines reaffirm that genuine well-being is found in ethical living, mental tranquility, and community built on mutual trust. And beyond even these, the text beckons toward nirvana, portrayed as the supreme release from craving, aversion, and delusion. While nirvana is often described as challenging to conceptualize, the Dhammapada repeatedly highlights its hallmark: unshakable serenity, born of a mind that no longer clings to passing phenomena. Running through all these verses is a deep reverence for mindfulness. Mindfulness is the path to the deathless. Negligence is the path to death. The mindful do not die. The negligent are as if already dead. This poetic contrast captures a core sentiment. To live heedlessly, blind to one's mental processes, is to remain trapped in a repetitive cycle of suffering. To cultivate steady awareness, on the other hand, is to open the door to liberation. The text does not detail specific meditation exercises or lengthy instructions, yet the recurring call to vigilance underscores how critical it is to keep watch over thoughts, words, and actions. Whenever we bring clear attention to the present, we take a step closer to seeing how our mental states arise and dissolve, and how each choice we make can either perpetuate struggle or invite insight. Throughout its verses, the Dhammapada also frequently contrasts the fool and the wise one. In its parlance, a fool is not necessarily unintelligent, but rather someone who remains blind to the moral and karmic consequences of their actions. The wise one, by contrast, has awakened to the law of cause and effect, recognizing how each intention, each gesture, ripples outward. By weaving these reflections into short, memorable lines, the Dhammapada serves as a kind of spiritual mirror. Each time we read a verse about the fool's self-destruction, we might ask ourselves, am I clinging to old resentments, illusions, or pettiness? Conversely, when we see descriptions of the wise one's calm, we might feel inspired to cultivate a bit more kindness or patience in our own daily challenges. Though the text itself is very concise, its oral commentaries, commonly referred to as the Dhammapada Atthakatha, flesh out many verses with illustrative stories. One such story, often told, involves two monks and a woman at a river crossing. The older monk carries the stranded woman across in order to help her, setting her down on the opposite bank. The younger monk later chastises him for making physical contact with a woman, which monks traditionally vow to avoid. The older monk replies that he himself left her by the riverbank, but the younger monk seems still to be carrying her in mind. This parable, while not present in the Dhammapada's verses, aligns closely with its teachings on the power of mental attitudes. Again and again, we see the principle that it is not mere rules or external appearances that define spiritual maturity. It is the depth of one's inner clarity and benevolence. Over time, as Buddhism spread across Asia, reaching Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Thailand and beyond, the Dhammapada became a principal text recited by monks and studied by lay people. Many key lines entered popular idioms, reminding entire communities to watch over their minds, temper anger, and uphold honesty. When Western explorers and scholars encountered Buddhism in the 19th century, the Dhammapada was among the earliest texts translated into English and other European languages. Its elegant simplicity, devoid of heavy philosophical jargon, intrigued many readers seeking universal moral insight. In contemporary times, the Dhammapada continues to appear in world literature anthologies, quoted for its timeless guidance on human conduct and well-being. While the Dhammapada is intimately associated with Theravada Buddhism, its messages resonate across different schools of thought, including Mahayana and Vajrayana. Its verses do not delve into doctrinal complexities, nor do they criticize other Buddhist branches. Instead, they speak in universal tones about taming the restless mind, refraining from harmful acts, and nurturing compassion for all living beings. This openness helps explain why the Dhammapada has remained so widely beloved. For someone encountering the text for the first time, it may read almost like a compilation of moral proverbs, short lines reminding you to act with care and understand life's fragility. Yet, repeated engagement gradually reveals deeper layers. Beneath its pithy style lies a consistent worldview, one that treats moral choices, mental habits, and liberating insight as profoundly interlinked. A disciplined mind brings happiness, states one for T, summing up a core promise. Over and over, the Dhammapada insists that mental discipline, rooted in kindness, understanding, and mindfulness, is both the journey and the reward. If one can cultivate these qualities, then life's inevitable storms and heartbreaks need not overwhelm the spirit. Throughout centuries, Buddhist practitioners have turned to these verses for daily inspiration, chanting them at dawn or dusk, reflecting upon them during their quiet meditations, and using them as moral anchors in everyday life. They remind us that we're not helpless spectators of our destiny. Our mind has immense power to shape our responses to the world. Anger can be transmuted into empathy. Grasping can be dissolved by acceptance. And in this quiet shift, the path to liberation, known variously as awakening or nirvana, can become attainable moment by moment. Perhaps the secret to the Dhammapada's enduring appeal is that despite being ancient, it addresses timeless questions that every person grapples with. How can I find lasting peace in a world that keeps changing? Why do I suffer when I crave that which I cannot have? Is it possible to let go of grudges and transform anger into compassion? The text offers no superficial fixes. Instead, it provides pointers toward a consistent inner practice. Paying attention to what is arising in the mind, recognizing how fleeting each experience is, and allowing a gentle spaciousness in which old patterns can dissolve. Then, as the verses suggest, a lighter, clearer way of being gradually takes hold. Time spent with the Dhammapada is often compared to meeting an old friend who speaks simply yet profoundly. Many of its verses may seem obvious at first glance. Indeed, who would argue against generosity, truthfulness, or patience? But living those truths sincerely in the face of everyday pressures is the real challenge. By returning to these lines periodically, one is reminded that the mind needs constant tending, like a garden that flourishes only when diligently cared for. Neglect it, and the weeds of anger and greed surge forth. Mind it carefully, and it yields blossoms of compassion and wisdom. In drawing these reflections to a close, we recall once again the line, "A disciplined mind brings happiness." If we step away with just that seed, we already hold the essence of the Dhammapada. It is a text that invites us to examine the process by which each thought can either liberate us or bind us more tightly to needless affliction. It is neither dogmatic nor overly intricate in doctrinal details. Rather, it is a luminous reminder that we humans carry within us the keys to our own freedom or continued unrest. Through stories of fierce bandits turned gentle, of monks free from anger, of individuals who realize that life's impermanence is not a threat, but a path to acceptance. The Dhammapada paints a collective portrait of transformation. That transformation rests in one simple yet powerful place. The mind that sees clearly, loves boundlessly, and remains grounded in the recognition that all things, including sorrow, shall pass away. Thank you for joining Sacred Texts Summarized in this exploration of the Dhammapada. May these timeless verses continue to resonate in your reflections, guiding you toward calm, clarity, and compassion as you walk your own path through life's ever-shifting landscapes.